that the moment of greatest danger for the regime is actually once this, whether it's, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks, whatever, once it's over, then there will be a lot of self-reflection and reckoning.
Okay, Ali. Well, look, let's start with a simple one, I guess. This back and forth over the weekend, we've had Donald Trump calling for Israel and Iran to make a deal. From your point of view, how likely is it that Iran would cede to any sort of deal in the current circumstance?
Well, I mean, there is always the possibility that they may realise that the sort of damage being inflicted on wider the wider Iranian political economy, and also, the level of casualties that are being inflicted, which I have to say, as far as the Israelis are concerned, it's I think very counterproductive of them to hit residential sites if that's indeed what they're doing. The fact is that it is possible that they will seek some sort of way out, because they'll see that the regime is under deep threat. And not only that, also the country and the infrastructure of the country is getting a lot of damage. So there is a possibility that they will come to some sort of compromise. I find it difficult to see how that might be done with the current people in charge. I mean, it may be that there's some sort of shift in the power balance within Iran. But if we want a swift resolution, then really it's got to be Khamenei coming in and deciding that now is time to drink the vial of poison to echo Khamenei himself back in 1988 when he decided to bring the Iran-Iraq war to a close. But at the moment, they're sort of the view that they can outlast the Israelis. I think that's a miscalculation, to be honest. But it's this idea of who has the greater tolerance for pain. And their view is that they may have greater tolerance of pain. I think that's it's a gamble at the end of the day. I think it's certainly a gamble for the Israelis in what they're doing, particularly when it comes to ideas about regime change. I think that was probably a little bit reckless of Netanyahu to make this very public, because it's a somewhat opaque objective. I mean, I don't know how you say I've achieved it, basically, unless you have a complete collapse. But it's it's possible that they will. It's possible that they will, but probably not in the immediate future.
How much might that decision be taken, having seen what Donald Trump has said, which is, this threat of direct military action against Iran with what is called the full might of US forces? Would that impact that decision?
I think that might turn heads in Iran. I mean, one of the interesting things is the Iranians have been very careful about trying to keep this bilateral. They think they can win against the Israelis. I mean, I have to say that on current evidence, that looks like a miscalculation in itself. But certainly, if the Americans pile in, then there's absolutely no chance that the Iranians are going to be able to, and the Iranian regime is going to be able to survive this. It will be an enormously difficult situation for them. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It depends what Trump wants to do. I mean, God help us if the Americans do get involved in a massive way. I hesitate to think what will happen to the country, but it's if the Americans pile in on really sort of Fordo in particular, and the sort of the nuclear sites, then that's one thing. But if Trump unleashes his inner machismo, if I can put it that way, it's potentially going to be very, very bad. I mean, much worse than it already is, if I can put it that way. And there are going to be some people thinking in Iran that we have to bring this to an end. I mean, we cannot simply go on in this way. So there are. And I'm sure there's already some thinking about that already, by the way. I mean, I'm sure there are people sort of thinking, because partly the response to the Israeli attack has been so weak in the initial days anyway. And what they're doing is obviously now just flinging every missile they can possibly get at the Israelis. So, at the moment, their view is that they will in sort of outlast the Israeli. As I said, given that the Israelis have a certain degree of international support and the Iranians have none, I can't see how that's going to happen.
Having said that about, this Trump threat, there's also this suggestion, this report that Israel say they had an opportunity to assassinate Khamenei. Well, two questions, I guess. Number one, does that then change the thinking if America is going to actually no, we're not prepared to let that happen? But also, if they did manage to do that, what does Iran look like in that scenario? Is there an opposition ready to take over? Are there supporters of his ready to take over? Are we talking civil war?
Well, it's. I mean, the problem at the moment with making any assessment of what the views are in Iran is that things are extremely volatile. I mean, when you're having bombs landing on your head or the threat of bombs, it's not the best time to make a clear assessment of what, in a sense, is going on. And there will be a wide variety of different views. Often, two contradictory views will be held by the same person. By the way, I mean, it's that sort of situation. They may have intense dislike of Netanyahu, just as they have intense dislike of the regime. I mean, it's this sort of thing which makes it highly problematic to make any sort of assessment. Khamenei is not popular. There's no doubt about it. I'm not sure what the merit would be in actually knocking him out. That would be political leadership. The Israelis have said that hasn't. I mean, they've denied it. Actually, I mean, they've denied that. I mean, I'm not sure why. I mean, in a sense, that might have been put out just to give Khamenei a bit of the heebie-jeebies. In a sense, I mean, he must know that he's potentially a target. At the moment, most of the targets, most of the specific targets have been military and scientific. The military science and that sort of thing. So it's difficult to know whether that's sort of, in a sense, black propaganda, intended to create more paranoia and panic. And certainly there's a lot of that going about. And, one of the worries has to be that, Iranians will start turning upon themselves. I mean, in the sense that, there's a great fear that, the Israeli penetration in a sense of the security establishment. I mean, people are actively saying, who has stabbed the country in the back, so to speak. Now, that's not there's a lot of decrying of basically opposition dissidents who are abroad and others. But I think there's an even worse sort of like decrying of what they see to be the utter failure of the military security establishment to keep the country safe. And the evidence suggests that some of these have been penetrated by, have been with Mossad, have been working with Mossad. We have no way of knowing, the veracity of this, really. I mean, there's obviously some element of it going on, but we don't know how extensive it is. But nonetheless, it's precisely the sort of atmosphere that will turn people, I think, against each other. Particularly once the bombing stops, there will be a reckoning. I mean, that's where the problem is. So that there are various possible outcomes. I mean, I suspect that the IRGC will want to try and maybe consolidate control, but of course their entire leadership has been decimated. It's very difficult. It may be that elements in the army may seek to come in on a strongly nationalist line to try and establish a degree of control. I mean, who knows? On the other hand, it's early days yet. It may be that the regime itself is in some way strengthened by what's happened. I mean, it may be. I doubt it myself, but there is an element here where they could say, if we survive, we've shown that we have survived and we have inflicted considerable damage on the Israelis. It's I'm very wary of making predictions at the moment because I just think the situation is extremely volatile. The mood swings are extreme. A lot of this is about the psychology of the whole encounter. It's not an easy one to discern, but what I think it's fair to say, and I will say this, I think the idea that Netanyahu has pushed out this idea of regime change at the moment, whatever, I think is a mistake. And the reason I think it's a mistake is because it puts that out there as an objective to be achieved, which is very difficult to sort of like assess. Whereas really, if something's going to happen in Iran, it will happen once this is over and people start to assess and reflect on what's happened. And that will be the moment of real weakness for the regime. Not now, because now, people are too worried about saving their lives. I mean, they're not really particularly worried about, doing anything else. So that's the, I think that's the point I would flag up, that the moment of greatest danger for the regime is actually once this, whether it's, I don't know, a week or 2 weeks, whatever, once it's over, then there will be a lot of self-reflection and reckoning. But again, it also depends very much on how the Israelis handle it. I mean, if the Israelis are going out with a sort of a, what Katz, who is he, the foreign minister? I can't remember, Israel, saying that Tehran will burn. I mean, this is a ludicrous thing to say, actually, for any politician, actually. But again, it's hyperbole. It's not a hearts and minds statement. Let's put it that way. I mean, you're not going to win many hearts and minds in Iran for that.
Let's talk nuclear situation. What do we know realistically about how much damage Israel has inflicted on the nuclear program in Iran? There's speculation. So, but what can you trust, do you think?
Again, it's extremely difficult to know until things are settled. I mean, what our estimation is, and what I've read certainly, is they have done pretty substantive damage. I mean, I think one of the things that I think we can later rest is this idea that a military attack would only set back the program by a month or 2 months. I mean, clearly it will set back the program by considerably longer than that. And I say that because basically what they're targeting is also aspects of infrastructure that will affect that, their ability to pick that up. And I think the argument here with the Israelis in terms of the way they're operating is they want the Iranians to focus on more basic, fundamental things rather than concentrating on nuclear development. So this delays everything. And, I think Natanz has been very badly damaged. Even Fordo has been to some extent damaged. We don't know how much, but there's also all sorts of other parts of the supply chain that have been affected. So I think when push comes to shove and when this is done, we will see that on this element of damaging the Iranian nuclear program, not eliminating it, but damaging it, certainly, damaging it for a substantive amount of time, a year or even 18 months or so. It's I think on that level they're well on their way of achieving that. That bit is a more tangible sort of assessment, and they can do that. As I said, the wider ambitions are another thing. I mean, that's a different reason. It's so difficult to make an assessment of that. You see,
of course, they've killed a number of nuclear specialists as well, haven't they? This isn't just about damaging the sort of physical sites, etc. But I would imagine that they however many of those they kill, they can't actually destroy Iran's nuclear knowledge, can they?
No, not at all. I mean, this is the problem, and I think this is why there's also a huge amount of controversy, particularly about killing scientists. I mean, some of these are working in the military establishment, others are not. The point about this, of course, in a highly cynical way, and one if one wants to be quite sort of very bland about it, is basically to send a signal to scientists in Iran that don't work on the nuclear program. I mean, it's they want they don't want to offer any sort of sense of job security. I mean, that's basically what it is. I mean, some of them are probably more deeply involved in the military side of it than others, but I think over the years, by the way, and that some of the scientists have not been actually that deeply involved in the nuclear side. They're simply physicists of one sort or another. I have to say, not every single nuclear scientist that has been killed over the years, I think, is the product of Israeli intervention. I mean, I think some of it's also internal infighting. But certainly, obviously, on this occasion, you can see the Israelis have claimed it and they've targeted these people. I mean, it's an extremely ruthless attack in that sort of sense. I mean, one can't diminish it. I mean, it's been highly effective, but let's be honest, it's also highly ruthless in the way they've targeted us, and they've been doing this for a while. I mean, the other side of the debate, of course, is that the Iranians have also, I mean, the Islamic Republic, I should say, rather than Iranians as a whole, but the Islamic Republic has also been pretty ruthless as far as the Israelis are concerned and attacked them. So it's not, I'm not a great one for sort of saying that, in the sort of saints and sinners category, that one is a saint and the other a sinner. I mean, it's far too complicated for that, unfortunately. I mean, really, regrettably. And the great tragedy of all this for me is that this sort of thing should have been avoided. I mean, when you get into a stage where you're in open conflict, something has failed. I mean, it clearly has failed, and not only diplomacy but also politics, I think, has failed. So, and on that front, if on the political front, there's quite a bit of blame that you can put on the Iranian leadership. I mean, there's no doubt about it in my mind.
I've got two more quick ones for you, Ali, if that's okay. The first, this attack must have just emboldened Tehran. You've talked about 18 months, say even Israel has put it back 3 or 4 years. It must have emboldened Tehran to just accelerate its race to build a nuclear bomb, if that was indeed ever the intention.
Well, I mean, I'm slightly more, first of all, what's very interesting is they've maintained on this front, they've been very, they've maintained this line. I mean, whether we believe it or not, that they will stick within their lines. They don't plan to build a bomb. They're not planning to leave the NPT, so on and so forth. And they're keeping quite strict. Again, they're limiting, the war, the hearts and minds battle, the war of the words, is basically targeted at basically, ensuring that Israel is seen as the sinner in all this. I've always had a certain amount of. There will be some, obviously, who will want, and by the way, I don't entirely discount the Israeli argument that there were some within the regime that were anxious to move ahead with a bomb. I mean, certainly after last year. I mean, to my mind, one of the problems with all this, as far as the Israelis was concerned, is the minute the Iranians started launching missiles into Israel, last April and again in October, I thought then, we're in a much different situation. I mean, because even if they didn't build, a nuclear bomb, they clearly shown their willingness to chuck missiles into Israel, and one of those could be armed with something. I mean, not necessarily. I don't particularly think, even though the Iranians, in terms of some of their propaganda, are arguing that they're very happy to nuke Tel Aviv or something, which is a completely ill-judged and absurd thing for them to do. I think fundamentally, again, of course, this is changing the political calculus in Iran, of course. So, one has to assume that when the dust settles, people in Iran will say, is it really worth us going through this sort of thing in order to get, should we not focus our expenditure, our money, the economy is not in great shape. Should we not focus on doing, building up the economy? And that's basically what they should have done, to be honest. I mean, they've spent a lot of time huffing and puffing about nuclear weapons and being a great power and a regional power. And some people in the West have sucked this up. I mean, they've really bought, that Iran's a regional superpower. Iran is not a regional superpower, really. I mean, it's been able to get away with stuff, partly because, after the US withdrawal, from Iraq and Afghanistan and US fatigue with the Middle East, basically. I mean, the Iranians and the Russians have filled that vacuum. But their might has largely been the consequence of other people not stopping them, if I can put it that way. It's been people letting them get away with it. And what you've seen over the last 18 months is actually massive pushback on a scale that obviously few of us could have perceived, which has severely damaged that position. And I think a lot of Iranians and others will contemplate and say, why are we going down this road when actually what we need to be doing is building up the political economy of the country and hospitals and schools and this, that, and the other. It's a bitter pill to swallow for some of them, I'm sure, because there's a lot of sort of nationalist, sort of a complex in Iran that, we are a sort of a great power, this, that, and the other. But, there's also been this widespread argument in Iran that, we don't want to go down the road of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had lots of nuclear weapons. Look what happened to them. It's not so. Again, I think that debate will become much, much more live. And there is if the Israelis can claim, if they're successful in the long run, is they will have changed the political calculus.
You've sort of touched on my final one there, so I'll just get you to delve into it a little bit more, which is when you said a lot of people have allowed Iran to sort of put themselves in this position. On that basis, then, do you think Israel is really doing what the West wants them to do with this? Is this dealing potentially with an issue that others want dealt with?
Yeah, here is a point that I think has to be made, and that is that there is an element where the regional, and I include the Arabs here, the regional as well as the Europeans and others, have become so fed up with Iran over the years. I mean, and that's part of the problem. So, the question mark, I mean, I drew this analogy in a piece I'm sort of writing that, back in 1980 when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, there was a lot of complaint in Iran that the UN Security Council didn't condemn the attack, the invasion, which, on the face of it, they should have. I mean, what they forgot to mention, of course, was that, the time they were sitting, holding, 53 American diplomats hostage or something, in the embassy in Tehran. And so therefore, I knew it. I got it from the horse's mouth. Diplomats were saying there was no appetite in the UN Security Council to condemn the invasion because we thought, well, bloody hell, they're breaking the rules anyway. And I get the sense now that this is the problem, that, there is, on the face of it, what Israel has done is broken international law. I mean, I know international law is a great sort of people raise it a lot. I mean, most of us actually don't know a huge amount about it, but, everyone says this is breaking international law, this, that, and the other. International law, like most application of the law, is always, can't be interpreted outside the political context. And I think that the problem here is that you have a situation where obviously the Israelis would argue that they were taking preemptive or preventive. I mean, I don't know what the time they say preemptive, but there is clearly a wider political context here. And that is that, the Iranians have been on one level, they play by all the rules. On another level, they don't play by the rules. They're basically doing, what people call the grey zone. They're operating in areas, under the shadows, this, that, and the other. And it's been very difficult to pin that down, really, of course, in many ways, because the Iranians always have plausible deniability. Last year is effectively when those rules changed. I mean, last year is when the Iranians came out of the woodwork, in a sense, and they put their heads above the parapet. And they were forced to do that, really, because of the war in Gaza and, of course, the war in Lebanon and others. So, and they didn't like it. And now they're sort of in the front line, really, with the Israelis. And you get the sense, unfortunately, this is just the fact. You get the sense that for all the condemnation that some countries are coming out with, they're sort of, they're not unhappy about it. I mean, they sort of think, well, it's high time. The Iranians got a bit of a taste of their own medicine, basically, is what they're saying. And this is the tragedy of it, really, because I think, most Iranians don't want this. They're not interested. They've never been interested in this sort of foreign policy of the Islamic Republic. And, they're paying the price for it. They're paying the price for this sort of recklessness, and it's as I said, I think it's tragic. But you can see it in public opinion. I mean, even their close friends, the Russians, aren't really doing anything as far as I can see. I mean, it's they've offered to mediate apparently, but fat lot of good that is at the moment.